Did you know that jazz, and specifically jazz improvisation, is just a bunch of licks strewn together? You don't even have to know what you're doing. You just learn those licks and you've got it. Right? Well, let's discuss that in today's episode of Office Hours with Bob Ross, episode number 39. So let me give you a little background about what spawned this topic and why I'm discussing it. Recently, I was listening to a YouTuber talk about the different approaches that he had taken to learn the different styles of music. And when he came to the topic of learning jazz, he mentioned that it's just a bunch of licks. That's all you have to do. You learn the licks, you apply them, and you've got it. Now, this particular musician is not a jazzer, if that's the term you want to use, but he's more focused in on the heavier style of playing. And I dig that. I'm into that too. But the idea that when you look at jazz improvisation and only conceive it in a way of piecing together licks, and that's all you have to do, then you've already created a huge hurdle and a very limited belief or idea in what the music is, the art of jazz and what it is. And I think that some of you that listen already know this. Some of you who are newer to jazz improvisation, or maybe you're not part of it, but you're just kind of interested, may not know that entirely. And I think that where this person was coming from stems more from his talking about older school players in the bebop era and mentioning Charlie Parker and learning Charlie Parker lines. And I've heard it said before, whether it's true or not, that Charlie Parker had like 101 licks if you analyze his playing. Now that may be the case. And you take another player like Coltrane, and people talk about the giant step solo, and when you look at the giant step solo and the melodic patterns that he's using in that, like the 1, 2, 3, 5, to get through those changes that are happening so quickly, if you look at it just in that perspective and seeing it like that, then you could start to formulate an idea that, hey, it is just licks, and that's all you have to do. Now, for anybody that really gets into jazz and studies it, and you listen to what some of these old school players are talking about in jazz improvisation, they mention things like using licks as a crutch, and that is not the goal. And then in some cases, you even have players that would be very uptight with younger players coming in and just regurgitating all these licks that obviously were coming from other players. And if they recognize that, they'd call these guys out. So the idea that you're just going to take licks and regurgitate them, and I'm not saying that there's not players out there that do that, because there are. However, if you're trying to get into a more in-depth approach to the improvisation, and you're really seeing it in the sense of an art form, true improvisation, then it goes beyond just throwing down licks that you learned. And I don't have anything that, I really feel against the idea of learning the licks or learning phrases from players, because obviously most of us, that's what we do. And then, in the case of, I think a lot of players, and, I put myself in this category too, where you get so far along that what you start to do is come up with your own idea and own phrases. And that really is a synthesis of all these different ideas that you've come to acquire over time, and you combine those to create, in some sense, a combination of these ideas that become your own in some regards. So the thing is, when we're talking about improvisation and what that is, and I've said it, I'm sure, on the podcast before, and I've said it multiple times with students, is that you really have to see it in terms of having a conversation with others. And when you're in a group dynamic and you're having a conversation with others, you can't just come in, although some people do. The idea is not to come into the conversation, the musical conversation, with these preconceived ideas that you're just going to throw in just because it works over a certain chord. Because speaking musically for a moment, if you're coming into the conversation with a preconceived idea and a lick that works over a certain chord, and you're playing with the type of players that are really manipulating the harmony of a tune, it may not work so well to do what you think is the best approach because you stole this line from somebody and now you're just going to superimpose it over top of a certain harmonic situation that you feel is best suited for that idea. So you don't want to just regurgitate those licks. And if you compare it in the sense of having a conversation with others, you wouldn't want to come in to the group with a certain topic that is being discussed and have your set idea of the one thing that you prepared to say and just put that out there without listening to what's being said and understanding the context of the conversation. It wouldn't make sense. You have to be aware of that. So the idea that you're looking at a style of music, in this case jazz, and terming it as a genre of music where all you have to do is learn licks and you apply them and that's it. It, like I said, it's very, very limited in thinking, and that may be something that is a misconception that gets tossed around. And if that's the case, I would say take a listen to many different players. You're going to hear things that obviously carry over, and that's part of the tradition. But as you go through and you listen to people, you're going to notice that it's just not licks. You're not just playing licks. And I think that for some, in a more relatable case, if you're listening to, jazz that goes beyond the bebop era, and you're getting into, to where the music has developed, there are definitely some players out there where you're not hearing these certain licks or ideas that are being put in certain harmonic situations and can be studied to where you see it happening every single time. And I think, that's something that people can find when they are looking at Charlie Parker solo, is that, hey, when this certain harmonic progression comes up, he's playing that same lick, or he may change it up a little bit. And maybe the same thing with some other players. But, the way that the music has developed, and you're starting to see, or not starting to see now, but what has been taking place is this idea of approaching it in a conceptual way where you're taking concepts or limitations in your playing and applying that in your practice, and that will yield a lot of results and ways to work out progressions. And for me, at least for me in my practice and the way that I handle it is I don't want to be limited by that. If I notice that I'm playing in this, I think for me what has happened over the years is there was a time where I would get into the transcription process, but something kind of clicked for me, and this happened earlier on too in the metal. Listening to a lot of heavy metal and the solos those players were playing, I didn't want to play exactly what they were playing because it just felt like that's their thing. And I understand the importance of really getting into players and studying it and understanding the language of the different genres. But I didn't want to just rip that off and just play that. So I was very quick to try to go beyond that. And my practice now, and what it has been, is in a same kind of idea or concept of using ways to limit myself, which I refer to as limited creativity, and then looking at that as a way to develop ways to get through tunes to where I don't have a limitation. I don't want to have these limitations, and I don't want to use just licks in order to get myself through tunes. So that's just, a few things that came to my mind when I was listening, to this particular person. And again, I won't say the name of the YouTube channel or anything like that, but that's, for some people, that's their conception of what it is. And I just want to throw it out there that, hey, for someone that's involved in, pursuing this art form, that's not the way I see it at all. And I think there's a lot of players that, a lot of us that spend a lot of time working on this stuff that don't see it in that way either. You use the ideas to develop or to get into the music, and it's the language, but then you move beyond that, and you don't just look at it as lick-based improvisation. Before you go, please don't forget to subscribe to Office Hours with Bob Ross. Please make sure to give it a rating. Leave a comment. Let me know if there's anything that you would like for me to discuss on the podcast. Any topics that you're interested in, any questions that you may have, just let me know in the comments. Thanks for listening, and I hope you can join me again next time for Office Hours with Bob Ross.